This is a throwaway account, and I don't need any of my friends knowing how crazy I am. My family has lived in the same house for 35 plus years. When I was 12, my grandmother came to live with us when my grandpa passed. She needed a wheelchair and constant care. We had to install a lift on the front side of the stairs. It was a metal platform that rode on a metal track. An electric motor powered it. I was fascinated by the lift and its installation. Not only did it promise to be a poor man's amusement park ride, but the whole process of drilling holes into concrete steps, epoxying in anchors, and leveling the tracks was right up the alley of my wannabe engineer self. It was immediately clear that my grandmother needed more care than we could provide, even with a visiting nurse for when we were at school and work. She stayed a little more than a month before having to be put in a facility, which rapidly became hospice. She died a few months later. The lift was a symbol of grief, a monument to my parents' inability to care for my grandmother. When I got caught riding it with my friends, my mom didn't yell. She just looked at me and her lip quivered and dashed inside. I was guilt-stricken and felt worse than any punishment could have ever made me feel. I never rode it again. Soon after, my father had it removed, which, believe it or not, cost more than it should have. In its place there were sawed-off anchors running up one side of our steps. They were rusty little bolt cross-sections with a thin ring of epoxy around them. I remember tracing them with my fingers while sitting on the stairs with my girlfriend while I tried to get the nerve to kiss her. The next year the anchors were gone. No rusty circles, no chips where they used to be, nothing. I assume my father had just patched them up so that my mom wouldn't have to look at them anymore. At that time I couldn't figure out how he did such a great job. It looked really neat and pretty much brand new. So I asked. When I asked him, my father looked at me in the strangest way. His face went from puzzled to disgusted to angry. He got that calm tone that I hated. That I already decided what I think of your crap look on his face. He said that it was not funny to joke about Grandma that way. How much would it crush my mom if I shared this with her? He asked if I was having trouble at school and assumed that I was trying to shock him or get his attention in some way. According to my father, my grandmother never moved in. The lift was never purchased or even installed, and Grandma went from her house to an assisted living facility when my grandfather passed. There was apparently a photo that was also taken of that time, and it shows no lift in the house. I chipped away at the stairs, and there were no holes or remnants of holes anywhere. And what about all that money? That lift cost thousands of dollars, and we could barely afford it. Removing it would have cost another huge chunk of money that we probably couldn't even afford. Altogether, this would have been the price of our family car. If we didn't spend it, is it still there? If I look at my father's bank records, will they show that there was some kind of an emergency loan taken out and spent on this lift? He doesn't make very much, and this was a big expense for our family. This was the most expensive thing we had to purchase, other than our car. I've lurked around the Glitch in the Matrix forum before, and many of these stories seem too imaginative. I found this sub and I prowled and I lurked. I can't really understand the things being described here. Changing worlds and fake memories sound all too much for me. My grandma coming to stay with us was when I lost my innocence. I saw adult diapers and drool puddles. I went to sleep smelling urine. I went from an inquisitive kid who wanted to ride a wheelchair lift to an introspective teenager who saw how ugly life ends. It was the first time that I saw my parents really fail at something, and it humanized them to me. Making my mom cry like I did was heartbreaking. What does this all say about what happened? Am I completely crazy? Am I insane? Is this what it's like to go insane? What else am I crazy about? Is all this stuff just invented in my mind? If it isn't, is that any better? There is no real answer that I can handle. I've lost my footing in life. I remember waking up one day and not being able to move my legs. I also remember drowning in the pool of my aunt's apartment. Nobody else involved in these memories remembers any of this. Number one, my dad was trying to wake me up. I was about 8 years old or so, and I told him that I couldn't leave the bed because my legs wouldn't move. I tried to move them, but it was like there was a block between my head and my legs. They just wouldn't move, even though I wanted them to. He scooped me up and he put me in his truck and we went to the hospital. I'm pretty sure that it was Baylor Medical Center in Garland, Texas. I recognized the building's unique porch roof thing, you know? Anyways, we were admitted and I was given a wheelchair to sit in. I remember that in particular because I was having fun figuring out how to turn it by using one wheel or the other. Eventually I had x-rays taken of my legs. I remember this very clearly because I was terrified. The nurse was very kind, and my mom was there, but the machinery was very scary to me. I was cautioned not to move, but since I couldn't move anyways, it was pretty redundant. We left the hospital, and I spent the rest of the week with my dad, and when school started that week, they left me with my grandmother. I spent a couple of days with her, and then the memory ends. I mentioned this to my mom and my grandma. I no longer speak to my father, but I couldn't get in touch with them even if I tried, and neither of them remember any of this at all. My mom remembers taking me to the hospital for something about my legs, but can't pin down what happened. It was 17 years ago, though. It was a while back. Here's a second memory that I have that apparently never happened. When I was 12, I was at my aunt's apartment there to use the pool, as our apartment complex didn't have one. My aunt, my mom, and I were in the pool, and we all had the day to ourselves. The pool was made of two rectangles forming a 90-degree angle. One of the rectangles of the pool was slightly smaller than the other one. My mom and my aunt were in this larger area, floating on one of those inflatable lounge things that go in the water. I remember bobbing my head out of the water trying to get their attention. There was something bothering me, and I was scared, but I don't remember what it was. I can't breathe enough to yell at them. I mean, looking back, I can infer that I was probably drowning. That memory just ends in a sort of purple, but neither my mom nor my aunt remembers this at all. The only theories that I have is that perhaps I have some false memories, or I remembered something wrong, or differently for some reason. Or these things happened to another version of me, or they happened to me in another reality, if that makes any sense. For the last 5 years, I've been begging my husband to write down his experience that he had one night. I finally got him to do it. This is his story, and he's also very verbose and extremely detailed when telling it. So it's kind of long. Obvious names of people and buildings have been changed, but the city and state are correct. So here goes. I worked in a new hotel in Wilmington, Delaware called the Seattle Suites, and had been there for about a year and a half. I enjoyed the opportunity to do new things as a server, work banquets, meet business people and political leaders of Delaware, and fulfill my dream of becoming a bartender. Lately, however, I was getting frustrated with my situation. The boss that brought me over from Ross Reich, the best wine restaurant in the state, had just left to run Blackout Bistro. The boss that took over and still recognized and rewarded my hard work and quality of work had also just left to run a hotel on the Jersey Shore. I had a new boss that came from the now bankrupt Bighorn Beef House and brought his own crew of employees that he knew from there. He didn't really seem to care about me much, and my advancement was pretty much stuck in neutral. It was my Friday, as we say in the restaurant business. Our days off are always in the middle of the week, unless it's for a vacation, a holiday, or you're in the middle of a suspension. It was nice to have a Friday off for once in a long time. I went to Sal's Sports Grill on the west side of town, ordered my Woodford and Grand Marnier Manhattan, and placed a to-go order I take home to share with my very supportive wife. I was angry over my situation, and it had been showing all day, so much that I guess pretty much everybody could see it. A few seats down from me was a man with long hair, who from the sounds of it was also in the restaurant business. He was buying drinks for the people that he was speaking with, taking shots with them and the bartender, and he seemed to be having a really good time. He had a positive outlook on life and a really good demeanor that I wish that I had. The people that he was talking with got their takeout food and left. He then turns to speak with me. He had picked up on my frustration and ordered some drinks for the both of us. We started talking about being in the business. He heard me out and shared some big picture wisdom that he gained over the years of working in restaurants and nightclubs. It had turned out that he'd been the maitre d' at the now closed Ristorante Rio Grande at Penn Condo's tower not far away. He actually worked with a lead server from Ross Reich named Jesus Juarez. I was under the impression from Jesus that he had owned Ristorante Rio Grande, but apparently that wasn't the case. This man, Nico Caligay, was the guy who really owned it, or as I was told, operated it for the mob. It was an interesting thing in the state of Delaware. We never had the quote-unquote mob here officially, but from what I knew, we had rolled the associates and capos of the greater Philly mob into legitimate businesses that helped develop the state and bring wealth to it. From our beer distributor that delivered the Budweiser to Sal's that Nico was drinking, to buildings and wings of buildings with philanthropic donor names on them. It was an open secret. I spoke with him about some of the people tied to his organization that I knew, and he silently nodded to confirm that this was true and this was the way things were. My order was ready and I was ready to go. My wife was texting me and I was telling her that I'd be on my way home soon. It was nice chatting with this guy. I thanked him for the conversation, wisdom, and encouragement, and he asked me to hold on and told me that he wanted to show me something at his place. His place was an apartment in the recently developed Section 8/workforce housing complex that he called the Pads. I was wondering how he was living there. Before I could ask, he said that he was out of work for over a year due to being diagnosed with cancer, but that he had just beaten it, in his words, and was back to working with his associates and for his capos. Apparently he had used their connections to get him a place at that location, utility-free. He bragged about how a beautiful nurse would come visit him periodically and help him quote-unquote manage his recovery. He talked about this attractive maid that would come over once a week to clean his pad and do other things for him, if you know what I mean, just like that nurse. He also said that part of his job was to look after the neighborhood and make sure that nobody ran the place into the ground. He showed me pictures of himself from when he was in high school and when he graduated. I knew the school and he showed me the year. At this point I was trying to remember every detail as best that I could. His name, his age, the apartment number. He showed me framed pictures of himself running the Ristorante Rio Grande, and he showed me framed newspaper reviews of the restaurant naming him and how great his service was. He turned to a desk in his living room off the edge of the kitchen, and there was a yellow-lined large notepad with page after page of names and restaurant connections in a tree-like diagram. He said his work also consisted of figuring out the hierarchy of every restaurant and who owned them in hopes of organizing the workers into a union. Obviously, it was a union run by his organization. He told me that he could use somebody like me for help, and that there was always jobs and opportunities in his organization. To reciprocate the conversation and to showcase my skills, I showed him a commercial that I was featured in at my hotel's Blue Granite Bar and Grill. He watched the commercial and commented that I lacked confidence and appeared nervous, and that I couldn't sell anything like that. I must admit that when this happened, I was jacked up on coffee, and it was a last-minute thing where I was thrown in there by my boss. I barely knew the dishes that we were serving, and I was asked to describe them. But, as my boss said, "Marcus, you talk too much anyways. You'll be perfect, so get in there." Nico talked about how he had beaten cancer and had prayed to his saints as a devout Catholic. He had his jewelry that his mother had given him that she had prayed over and she had blessed by local priests. His mother had given him jewelry for his strength before she passed. Nico attributed his recovery to blessings from God and strength that he had received from this jewelry. He then insisted on giving me these bracelets so that I could receive the same strength and courage that he did from them. And after some back and forth and me not wanting to take something that was so important to him, I finally accepted this as his gift. He insisted on clipping this bracelet on me and taught me a prayer that he said it was patron saint during his battle with cancer. After thanking him, I feel a buzzing from my phone. My wife was texting me, rightfully, wondering where the heck was I and what I was doing. I texted her back that I'd explain later. I was hyper aware of everything, and this experience had me really weirded out. If all of this was true, I was privy to a lot of information that most people should know, and had made a connection with somebody who was part of a criminal organization. I thanked him for his hospitality, but said that I had to be going, and he showed me a burner phone that he had that he used to talk to his associates and capos. He insisted that I take down the numbers. I took a picture of the two numbers on the phone. Interesting that there was two numbers. I also created a contact for him on my phone, and I showed him that I created the contact and had the picture of the numbers, and I showed him that as well. He insisted that I call him the next day, and there was lots of work to do, and that he could use somebody like me for help in his organization. I thanked him again and left out the door. I usually walk down Republic Street, which the Pads and Sal's Sports Bar and Grill were on, but tonight I didn't want the day-glow lights of Little Italy revealing who I was on the street. I needed to walk where I wouldn't be seen, as there were security cameras on the street. I told Nico where I worked, but not where I lived. I walked down the sidewalk against the traffic down Bayard Byway. As soon as my brisk pace brought me under the cover of the centuries-old trees, in the cover of the midnight darkness, I called my wife. My hand was an ice brick bringing the phone to my ear on that freezing February night. When my wife answered, I told her everything that I could, and then I went on my way. I got home and I ate with the missus while I looked up all this on the phone. It checked out. This guy was who he said he was, and worked where he said that he worked. The next morning I did call both numbers, but nobody answered. The other number didn't exist according to the auto-generated message. Funny, they were both Delaware cell phone numbers with known cell phone exchange numbers. It was all beyond weird, and I wanted to leave it alone for a while. I hadn't yet reached out to my boss from Ross Reich, Ravi, or Jesus Juarez to verify Nico's story. I did run into Ravi a month later and told him what happened. He knew that I had butted heads with Jesus a lot and agreed to ask Jesus for me about Nico. I bumped into Ravi a week later, and he asked Jesus about Nico. And Jesus had a response about Nico that I wasn't ready for. According to Jesus, Nico had been dead for over a year. That sent chills through my bones. I had drank with, visited the house of, and received bracelets that I was still wearing from a ghost. My experience was too real to deny, but so are death certificates. Let me start off by saying that I was born in 1998. So this by far is the weirdest experience that I've ever had. Anyways, I'm not much of a dreamer, but when I do dream, it's usually very lucid and memorable. So I had a dream that my mother was alone in an old poor house with my newborn sister and waiting for my dad to get home. It was dark out and my mother was anxious and waiting at the door, hoping that my dad would show up. The house was a one-room structure with only 4 to 5 candles illuminating it. I was casually talking to my mother, saying that it'll all be okay and just reassuring her that everything is okay. Suddenly my mother looked at me and was thanking me for being with her while she was alone and for protecting her. The next thing that I know, I wake up. I thought that it was an odd dream to have, but didn't think much of it afterwards. I showered and went to work. Fast forward 3 days and it's Friday night, and my parents and I are outside in the front yard sitting around a fire talking. And my parents began to joke about how my mother used to pop my father's bike tires when they lived in Mexico. My parents are Mexican and came to the U.S. in 1995. In 1991, they lived in an old shack in a poor part of a small town in Mexico for a year. My father had a habit of going out on his bike with his friends to drink and not coming home until the next morning. So my mother would pop the tires on his bike so he wouldn't leave. I laughed and didn't think much else, but they continued on with the story. My mother said she'd be terrified of going home alone in a tiny home because they lived in an alley known as El Callejón de la Llorona, which translates to Alley of the Weeping Woman. For those unfamiliar with the Weeping Woman, it's an urban legend in Mexico about a ghost woman who roams areas of Mexico and even parts of the U.S. weeping for her missing kids. So naturally, an alley named after this La Llorona ghost woman is going to be terrifying for anybody. My mother continued on saying how terrified she was in that house alone and would wait praying for my father to come home. My father then made a joke saying something along the lines of, "Why did you want me there? You claimed your guardian angel was protecting you." At this point I thought, okay, what's going on? So I asked my mom more, and she told me that one night she was visited by a man who seemingly came out of the wall, but she felt comfortable and familiar around this man. He sat and spoke with her, reassuring her that it was going to be okay. The man seemingly walked back into the wall. My mother said that after this she felt a strong calmness and was no longer afraid thereafter. This tripped me out, considering that I was born in 1998, and I had never heard a thing about my mother's story until after I had that dream. I'm not sure if it's just a coincidence or if it's something more complex. I want to report this and just tell you a little bit about my parents before I get into the story. My father used to use lots of stuff when he was younger, and by stuff I mean mind-altering substances, and he also believes in aliens. I don't believe his account would be very credible here on Reddit, but my mother, she is religious and has never done anything like that. She doesn't even drink. It's a weird couple. I don't know how they got together, but thank God they did, or I wouldn't be here. So I believe her account and her version of this. The reason that I bring that up is because her version of this is exactly like my father's, the weirdo who believes in aliens. Anyways, my parents were on a small island in Florida on vacation, and there are not many places to eat there. They drove around and randomly found a restaurant. They said there weren't many cars in the parking lot, which made what they saw inside even more weird. They walk into the door and see a very full restaurant of people. Everybody stops, stares, and smiles at them. Everyone. Then they go back to what seems like scripted conversations while still looking at my parents. The hostess comes up to them and smiles and simply replies, "Sorry, everything is full. You should go now." The phrase my mom and dad kept using was, they were like actors. My parents left as instructed. They couldn't stop talking about what happened the next day and decided to go back to see everything again. They drove all over that small island and never found that restaurant or the actors ever again after that. My parents hate telling this story and hate when I ask about it for some reason. Visible goosebumps appear on their arms immediately at the mention of it. The only plausible non-glitch thing my brother and I thought of was that it was some kind of a setup by the FBI, the police, or something. Maybe, perhaps dealing with some kind of a drug bust, but they were waiting for criminals. This obviously doesn't explain the restaurants appearing and then disappearing overnight. I live in a town with several 19th century era buildings, including a few Napoleonic forts. 4 known ones that are well known to urban explorers and have thoroughly been explored and mapped, including one with several tunnels. When I was 16, me and my friends decided that it would be a fun day to go out there. We had done this many times and knew the fort by heart, including all exits and entry points that had not been closed up by the council yet. We went in as usual and all seemed normal. We climbed around and had some fun before moving on into the tunnels. We decided to go through the most popular tunnel there, as it was the easiest to navigate, and also one of my friends was a bit claustrophobic. We had gone through this tunnel several times before, and so did many others, so it's very well mapped, and usually opens up to just a big empty room, with the windows looking into the center of the fort. This tunnel does fork off into 2 directions, but both lead to similar rooms. However, this time for some reason, after taking a left at the fork like we usually did, as that room on that side was in a less decayed state, the tunnel opened up to something that to this day me and my friends cannot explain. We entered what at first seemed to be the same room, but we quickly noticed that it was in a near perfect state. There was no more graffiti, there was no vandalism, there were no empty beer cans lying around, and there wasn't a charred floor from the years of campfires. Nothing. It was like the place hadn't been touched since it'd been converted into a hospital during World War II. We were very confused but decided to look around, and we quickly noticed that this was a completely different fort. We all thought that we had stumbled upon this place by accident and that somehow it had gone unnoticed by urban explorers in the area. And we just found it on accident. With little hope, I tried to look up the coordinates, but unfortunately, because we were in this area that was essentially buried underground, I couldn't get the GPS signal, so I couldn't find out exactly where this was. We explored and speculated on the position of the untouched fort for the rest of the day, thinking that we had scored gold, having found ourselves a dream hideout and hangout area. The tunnel was roughly 1 kilometer long, so we knew that it couldn't be too far from the known location. After exploring this urban explorer's paradise, we packed up and left without any problems. We went through the tunnel and popped out the other end in the expected place. But this is where it struck us. We took great care in noting our way back through the tunnel in order to find the fort again on our next visit. The route we took was the same as we always did. We had not accidentally deviated or anything into some other area or taken some other tunnel out. It was the exact same route we usually took. Me and my mate decided to quickly run back just to make sure. We arrived at the opening, and as usual the tunnel opened up to the room that we had seen earlier. However, something strange has happened ever since that time we found that room. Since then, my friends have tried numerous times to find that fort again, but they haven't had any luck at all, and unfortunately I am not able to take part in the search at this moment for personal reasons. I have tried, however, to find signs of it on Google Earth, but unlike its supposed neighboring fort, it does not appear to be there. I often wonder in amazement how me and my friends were able to run into a place that seemingly does not exist and never seemed to have ever existed. To this day, the fort reminds me of some of those glitch in the Matrix stories I always hear about. For me and my friends to find a fort or a place that seemingly does not even belong in this reality anymore shows me how interesting and mysterious our reality can be.